I've spent over 1,000 hours using Cursor AI to write production-ready code over the past year. And what I'm about to show you is by far the biggest productivity hack I've found using the software in that time. What I'm going to show you is a new package that is blowing up at the moment. It is TaskMaster AI. I'm going to show you how to set that up on a new repo for one-shot development. I'm going to show you how to use that on an existing project. And then what I'm going to show you is, if that entire thing seems a bit too much, how to get 80% of the way there just using custom rules. Let's go. Okay, so what is TaskMaster? It is an NPM package and MCP server that helps AI coding tools like Cursor and Windsurf manage a project, keeping track of where you are along the process. What it does is breaks down the end goal of what you're trying to build into smaller tasks, and then keeps track of where you are in the process so it doesn't get lost in loops. You can even do research on individual tasks and breaking them down even further. This concept is really simple, but absolutely huge. Most of the time, I'm not vibe coding little side projects. I'm writing production software on an existing product that either is made to be used by millions of people or they're business critical. And the code has to be maintainable by others in the team that I've contracted into, most of which are still not using something like Cursor. As I'm sure you're aware, Cursor has two main ways to use it. One is ask mode, where we can ask things about the code that's going on, or ask it to make some changes. Ask it to change the font here to Gothic from Go Fonts. It'll look through our code base, look through this file, try and figure out what changes it can make to make that happen, and then suggest some changes. When we have these, we can apply them, and it overwrites some code. That's ask mode. The second way we can run this is in agent mode, where it can do more things at a time, check tests, go back and forth, all those sort of fun stuff. If we ask it to add a hero, so this is going to have to make multiple files, make changes in different places, figure out what's going on, make these tests. This agent workflow is really, really cool. Seems like it could be very good, but most of the time when I'm working, I have to split it down into such small tasks that it's just quicker to use, ask, and then write code alongside it. Now, the fact LLMs can't keep track of this much state at a time feels like a bit of a failure, but if you actually think about how you implement code or how I implement code, I would tend to keep track of things as I go. This is a ticket I'm implementing for a little client project. The context here doesn't really matter, but it's adding the ability to edit manual details of those manually added. I went and broke this down into smaller tasks of each part that I need to implement so that I've completed this ticket or job or feature. Essentially, that's what TaskMaster does. It splits up into smaller tasks and then keeps track as we go through. Now, if you can see here, these add fields to member edit modal for each custom field from manually added. That makes sense to me, but if another developer picked this up, that would make no sense. That's what TaskMaster takes control of, setting up these tasks in a way that a new developer would understand, like an LLM with less context can understand. It'll set these up, and then as it completes, essentially check them off. And then if you do something later in the process before earlier, it'll move them around. Okay, let's look at setting this up on a fresh project. Come into the repo here. I'll link this all below. They provide us an MCP server. I'm about to explain in a little second. We just put this into MCP JSON. This is set up. It needs keys here. To begin with, for initiating, we don't actually need that. If we come in and look at our cursor, MCP, see this is initiated. It knows what our tasks are. Fantastic. Okay. Now if we open up agent mode, I can say, I misspelled it here, but it should still figure this out. An MCP tool call here, project root, yes. This has initiated the project. What it has done is added some cursor rules, added a task folder, some stuff in git ignore that's specific to here, added windsurf rules, which I'm not using, so I'll delete straight off the bat. And then in script, this used to have some more local code stuff, but now example product requirement document to give you examples of how you can create tasks. And then it has also updated our MCP with this TaskMaster AI for TaskMaster MCP. Now, if I'm not mistaken, that second one won't work. Even though I disable and enable. No, client doesn't work. So that's something to note here. This project and repo is still very much in development and they're moving very fast. But this part here, I don't care about. Okay, so let's look at a little bit more of what it has given us here. It's given us a .env example. These are all of the environment variables that you can pass through to the MCP. You can see them here. Their Anthropic API key, which we're going to need for generating tasks and for the general process, and then Perplexity API key, which is for researching little sections. Very useful as well. And they all come into here. This is for the MCP server, but they're also the same things that you can pass directly to the CLI command line tool, which I will show you in a second. If we look a little bit further at the rules it's given us, one here is cursor rules, which is really nothing to do with TaskMaster. It's just a cursor rule that explains how to write good cursor rules. And then another one here, self-improve, is actually for explaining how and when to write more cursor rules to get cursor to improve its process. I've tried a few different things like this of cursor rules, self-improve, and never really got them to work exactly like I want. Normally, if I want to write a rule, I just tell cursor when to write it rather than getting it to figure out itself. But people might find these useful, and I'm sure they've got them in here because they do find them useful. But the big thing here in terms of cursor rules is dev workflow. What this is doing is explaining to our cursor agent how to use TaskMaster in a development flow. First of all, it explains that we can use either the MCP server or the CLI. Explains what the MCP server is, the sort of commands it's got, and then the CLI, what commands it has, as the command names are slightly different. And then it goes into explaining a normal workflow using TaskMaster. So it'll say you want to start the project by running init, which is what we've just done here. Begin each coding session with getting tasks, listing the follow-up task, determine what's next to work on, analyze complexity. See, it steps all through here, explaining to cursor how do we use our task management system. That's what's going on here. And then a little bit further down, it explains even more about task complexity analysis, and then task breakdown process. And then this implementing drift handling is what I was briefly explaining on this here. If it's building something, is if you're coding and you get to a point that you end up doing something further down the list earlier just because it's there and it makes sense, there's an entire process for handling drift, which is updating tasks and going from there. Also explains what we're doing with managing the state. So it starts with pending, whilst we're currently working on done, we're doing deferred, waited, and then explains a little bit more about the task structure. The fourth and final rule that it gives here is just more explanation on how TaskMaster works, with more information on every single command. But this is really where the bulk of the information that we're providing to cursor about how to use TaskMaster, how to develop with it, comes from. That's what each part is. How do we actually run this? How do we get this to work? So I've got a PRD here for a physio app that I'm working on. This is PRD project requirement document, just explaining what we need to build. I could give this to another developer or take this myself and work from here. So could I do the same with TaskMaster? Now the first thing we need to do is generate tasks from this. We need to parse this PRD. If we look in our README, it also explains this here. We run init, and then we want to parse our PRD. So that's what we want to run. First thing we need to do is take our example and fill this in with values. And I'll fill these in here. Now, I'm just not going to share them, but I will link below on how you get the API keys for both of those. I'm sure you can figure that one out. We've now got our environment variables. We need to run in here, parse our PRD. So I'm going to first try and do this with the MCP. I'm not hopeful this will work, but using TaskMaster, parse the PRD. We're running in here. It's going to first try and use our MCP. Okay, here. And we get a 401. I get this really often. I honestly can't figure out how to get the MCP running inside cursor here. And this is just changed, and the MCP they provided slightly earlier was different. So I tend to just use the command line, but I do use the command line in here. As I'm saying, this entire project is moving very fast. So by the time you come to this MCP might be working perfectly. But what I want to do is run the command line tool for TaskMaster parse PRD. Now the first stage to do that is to first install it globally. Run this. Now once you've got this installed globally, what you can do is run task, and this will start running. But despite using the command line, I don't really want to use it in the command line here. I'd really like my chat to figure this out so that when we work through the flow. So what I'm going to do is tell it, instead of using MCP, to use the command line. We've told it here. Now, if we come through to the dev workflow, it also tells it that we've got an MCP server and we can do this all using the CLI. It continually goes through here, but saying what the command line is for MCP and then what it is for the CLI. Right, we can see it's worked here. It's parsing the PRD. It's got a number of tasks, 18. I don't know why 18. The default is normally 10. Okay, task complete. Now it is run TaskMaster list. We can also see on the left hand side, it started creating all these tasks. Create our task JSON. I just say, show me the list of tasks. Again, yes, use the CLI. It explains what each of them are here. Come to the CLI. I might end up with a list of tasks here, each with dependencies on what makes them next. First of all, this is just an ID, not specifically the order. The dependencies means that this one has to go after 1, authentication needs 1 and 2, user profile management needs at least 3, etc, etc. Now, because setting this plan is the most important thing for getting this to run through well, especially if you're going to try and do something as large as this in one shot, you might want to update these. That is something that it has the ability to do. Again, you can either run it in the terminal. Looking at this list, I actually don't need implement billing and payment system. I might come in and say, right, remove billing and payment system. Because I've got a new chat, I've got to tell it to use CLI. I'm trying to use MCP. Has this worked? Okay, because this is not calling Claude, this has worked successfully. Fantastic. That one has also worked. Okay. Now, some of the MCP tools work fine. As I say, this might work completely fine for you when you run it. Quite a few times when I have run this, what I come and do is come into dev workflow and tell it to remove all mention of MCP because I only want to run this through the CLI. And that's helped me a few times in the flow. But I'm hesitant of suggesting any changes here, again, because this project's moving so fast. Let's actually get this thing started. First task, what is our next task? Project setup. Expanded task. Again, we get the 401. Okay. Telling you to use the command line tool. Wanted to expand the task, which will generate a subtask for this, and then I'm telling it to just get started. And this should just go through each step of this, taking through each of these, going with dependencies until we get to the end. See, it keeps calling tools here. It's set our stats to in progress. Set the stats for 1.1 and try setting up. And at any point, we can also look at task.json and see where we are. So it's added all of these subtasks, initialized, set till end, integrates with base client. A few of these, especially in the setup stage, I need to do things with. But this just gets going, and this allows you to do much larger stuff with one prompt. That's all great for trying to one-shot an app or project setup or vibe coding on a little project. But if you're a professional developer, 90% of your time is going to be spent on existing code bases that already have set standards in place. Is this still useful? And the answer is definitely. Pretty much the only change we've got to think about is instead of an entire product requirement document, we think about a feature document. And that's about it. If we come in and look at this project that I've been working on here, it's essentially a dashboard and then it crawls a bunch of websites and fills up the dashboard with members. I'm not even going to mess around with does the MCP work or not. I'm just going to come straight in and initiate the project in the terminal. Initiate the project. We set similar things to before. This MCP that wasn't working, we'll check again. Enable load, client closed. I'm just going to remove this. Anything else? Windsurf rules we don't need. For example, readme taskmaster tasks script. I don't need this either. Fantastic. This is the thing we were looking at earlier, these tasks here. I want to generate a PRD. Now I've looked through the code base and thought about how I would need to implement this, and I need to write a PRD with a plan for how to manually edit member details that have been manually added. Look at the schema, some files that I think are going to be relevant here. So now this is going to go and look through those files and try and formulate text that goes in here. Now this is something that becomes a lot more useful when you're working on an existing code base, is if you've got some sort of idea and you know what sort of things are going to be useful to generate inside Cursor. Generate this document that's going to generate the plan. Manual testing, okay. Okay, fantastic. Agent models. And that has generated just the text that I had here. And it knows the fields and things that we're looking for. It's even suggested some of the changes that we might need here. But I know from a feature this size, if I just tried to ask the agent straight away to go, there are too many files involved. I've only tagged about 3, but I know there's at least 10 files involved here that it's likely to get caught up and not be able to do this properly. Okay, so we know what we're trying to do. I nearly forgot, but the first thing we absolutely need to do is take these values from our env example and get them into our .env. Because I've got some values in here, I'm not going to show you, but we need to go and get, again, the Anthropic API key, perplexity key, and include these as well. Then once we've got this environment variable set up, what we need to do is parse it. So I'm going to come into here and ask here to use the TaskMaster command line to parse this PRD file, generating tasks. Because we're not provided the value, it's defaulted to 10 tasks. It's going to split this into 10 different places. And it's done. Right, we have our task list, implement, extend API, to API endpoint, create change history, fantastic, it's got that. Detection of manual members, field components, form submission, party stuff. Okay, great, just looking there. Let's start expanding, getting deeper for the first task. Great, now it's showing us first task as well. Now, something I quite often do is tell it to stop after each of these tasks. So essentially I've got 10 sort of checkpoints here. If I don't tell it to do that, it will just continue through. Because I need this code base to be in a certain format, what I'm going to do is explicitly tell it to, after each task, come back and check. I'll tell it to get started on task 1. Something I just wanted to point out here, it's interesting. It is split down for task 1.1 what it thinks needs to happen. But it is then checked through the code base and seen, oh, actually the things I would have done here have already been done. So I'm just going to mark that as done. That's again something that using just the agent by itself would really struggle to do. Struggled here. It's now progressing on. Again, this is forgot that we're using the CLI and it's tried to just update these text files as it is. Not terrible, to be honest. But because this system does a lot of things under the hood, we are best to use it. Okay, we're expanding out task 2. Great, now we've got to 2.1 and it has asked me before continuing, and that's what I'd like it to do after each individual task. Now, TaskMaster is great and handles a lot of funky things for you, but you can get about 8% of the way there with just using custom cursor rules. And I just wanted to quickly touch on how to do that yourself. Now, I've custom rolled a few of them, but this guy, Eli, that's part of Ramen Club community that I'm part of, shout out to Charlie. There's quite a lot of views on this setup of a rule that he has, and I'll link these both below. So just wanted to show you how you can set this up to run by yourself. So this is a cursor rule. I'm going to come up and go new cursor rule. Put this in to always attach. Now, what this is doing is just explaining to cursor to maintain a file that does a similar thing to here. This allows you to then go and edit it yourself, and it is just a little bit of a simpler way of doing this. And this honestly will get you quite far. So if we look at this, I'm just going to run this on the same sort of PRD that I was trying to do before. I'm going to run something very similar to what I did previously, trying to implement the same feature, but just adjusting this slightly to instead create tasks MD. And this has started creating this file, a task of what to do here. It came up with a very similar plan up to API endpoints. So again, some recommendations so that every time I run a command, it comes back with this context. Very similar to before, I'm going to say, come check back with me after every major step. So in this case, this would be after each of these. Okay, now it's made a bunch of changes here and has now got to the stage where it's going to update our task list. Close this just in case it messes with the file. Okay, so it's implemented. It's done a bit more than I expected, but we've got up to error handling and validation. But based on the amount of changes here, these clearly weren't as large as I expected. Completed, these are future tasks, and it continues with the plan. So if you've looked at the previous part of the video and thought, okay, that's cool, but a bit too much setting up, a rule can get you really, really far, especially for implementing features. I am genuinely really interested in how others have managed to solve this problem of giving AI more context over a longer period of time. So if you found anything different to what I've got here, please leave a comment below.